Let's start off. The Pharisees of Science. Who runs the world of science? Who enforces these rules and determines what is published? Basically, this is a lot of people and a lot of money. We already went through the textbook. So is Lawrence Krauss a physicist or just a bad philosopher? The theoretical physicist Lawrence M. Krauss is a foundation professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration and Physics Department, and inaugural director of the Origins Initiative at the Arizona State University, which is funny because Arizona State used to be a community college a long time ago before they joined the Pac-10, which is then the Pac-12, which is no longer. Everybody's going to the Big Ten, SEC. That's incredible. So this South African physicist, George Ellis, on Lawrence Krauss. He's presenting an untested, talking about Lawrence Krauss, is presenting an untested speculative theories of how things came into existence out of a pre-existing complex of entities, including variational principles, quantum field theory, specific symmetry groups, a bubbling vacuum, and all the components of the standard model of particle physics, and so on. He does not explain in what way these entities could have pre-existed the coming into the being of the universe, why they should have existed at all, or why they should have had the form they did. And he gives no experimental or observational process, typical of an evolutionist, whereby we could test these vivid speculations of a supposed universe generation mechanism. How indeed can you test what existed before the universe existed? You can't. Oh, then we have Mr. Richard Dawkins, evolution botanist, Mr. Flower Power. So Daniel Dennett is an influencer of his, Steven Pinker, Simon Baron-Cohen. We're going to learn about that guy. You ever hear of Sacha Baron Cohen, the actor? We got David Deutsch, Philip Pullman, Stephen Law, Andrew F. Reed, Bertrand Russell. He's a great philosopher. Apparently he came to Christ before he died. Then you have Mr. Charles Darwin, W.D. Hamilton, and Sir Francis Galton, which was Charles Darwin's younger cousin. So the critique on Richard Dawkins, an evolutionist botanist. So what happened? Get to that in just a second. For the public understanding of phylogenomics, an argument used by Richard Dawkins should be retired. Richard Buggs, down to the right, looks like a nice gentleman, professor at Queen Mary University of London. But for these reasons, it is important to point out where he has erred, or at least where scientific progress has discredited his claims. Because of his wide influence, it is in the interest of the public understanding of science that any mistakes he has made should be explicitly corrected. So this is Mr. Simon Baron-Cohen, one of the influencers of Mr. Richard Dawkins. I'll get back to the what happened in just a minute with both of these. So Mr. Cohen, Baron-Cohen, has a cousin who's an actor, a comedian, and apparently a composer, Aaron Baron-Cohen. So Sacha Baron Cohen, you've seen his movies. So this guy is the influencer. So what happened to this guy? Escape. Over here. So Simon Baron-Cohen, this is all of his Wikipedia, what he's got, his early life education, what he's done. He's the director of the university's Autism Research Center and a fellow of Trinity College. In 1985, Baron-Cohen, who was a Sir, so he was knighted. So it's interesting about knighting in England. You actually have to be a family member by blood. A lot of people don't know that one. So Barenco formulated the mind blindness theory of autism, the evidence for which he collated and published in 1995. Then in 1987, he formulated the fetal sex steroid theory of autism, the key test of which was published in 2015. Took a while to get published, didn't it? He's also made major contributions to research, cognitive sex differences, autism prevalence and screening, autism genetics, autism, which sounds really good on the face, but it's all evolutionary based. And I'll get to that in just a second. So let me go back to PowerPoint here. So what is eugenics? Eugenics is a scientifically inaccurate theory that humans can be improved through selective breeding of populations. Eugenics believed in a prejudiced and incorrect understanding of Mendelian genetics that claimed abstract human qualities, example, intelligence and social behaviors, were inherited in a simple fashion. Similarly, they believed complex diseases and disorders were solely the outcome of genetic inheritance. The implementation of eugenics practices has caused widespread harm, particularly to populations that are being marginalized. Eugenics is not a fringe movement. Starting in the late 1800s, leaders and intellectuals worldwide, Charles Darwin, Sir Francis Galton, and many others, they perpetuated eugenic beliefs and policies based on common racist and xenophobic attitudes. Many of these beliefs and policies all existed in the United States. So knowing this, why, if you're in this new evolved human being site, seeing what these people did, why would you believe in them? You give them a pass, but no God. So for Sir Francis Galton, let's go quickly here to see what this has to say. Well, Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, younger cousin, because he was born a lot later. So there's a 12-year difference-ish. Sir Francis Galton, FRS, FRAI, was a British polymath, which means that he kind of has an eclectic education in the Victorian era. He was a proponent of social Darwinism, eugenics, and scientific racism. Scientific racism. Galton was known for eugenics, behavioral genetics, such and such. He's the author of zoology, which has to do a lot with the eugenics of animals. So his early life and his heredity. So he also was a psychologist, so we'll just check out what he contributed. Psychology studies also embraced mental differences and visualization, and he was the first to identify the study number forms, now called synesthesia. So the British spell it with the A, then the E, but in American it's just S-Y-N-E, synesthesia. He also invented the word association test and investigated the operation of the subconscious mind. So let me take this back to here. So, eugenics, Sir Francis Galton. He was the proponent for social Darwinism. Eugenics is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Developed largely by Sir Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race, eugenics was increasingly discredited as unscientific and racially biased during the 20th century, especially after the adoption of its doctrines by the Nazis in order to justify their treatment of Jews, disabled people, and other minority groups. So this is incredibly in the incredulity of evolution theory-based science. Now, this is what evolution promotes. Evolution could be falsified by many conceivable lines of evidence, such as the fossil record showing no change over time confirmation, that mutations are prevented from accumulating in a population, observations of organisms being created supernaturally or spontaneously. So we're going to go through these. The fossil record showing no change over time confirmation. The fossil record is often touted as solid proof that the theory of evolution is true, while creation and the flood are false. When one examines the evidence, the opposite is found to be the case. The three major traits that characterize the fossil record: abrupt appearances, stasis, and extinction, contradict evolutionary prediction, and verify creation flood predictions. And this is right here from Apologetics Press. So we're going to go here, look at some articles. Does the fossil record support creation and the flood? This is by Jeff Miller, PhD. Prominent argument used in favor of Darwinism, evolution, and against biblical creation is that the account of the global deluge of Noah's day centers on the nature of the fossil record recorded in the layers of the rock beneath and around us. Does the fossil record indeed conflict with biblical creation? In order for a scientific theory to be validated, it should be able to make predictions about the research would discover if the theory is true. If gradual Darwinian evolution accounts for the origin of all current species from previous, less complex species, starting with an original, simple common ancestor that was a single-celled organism, one would make certain predictions that would be verified upon examining the fossil record. For example, the fossil record should show single-celled organisms at the base of the fossil record, followed by fossils of other simple organisms, then billions of fossils of intermediary organisms would be predicted to exist that connect the single-celled organism to the next species. Every species thereafter would follow suit in its representation in the fossil record, with its own billions of transitional fossils linking it to the previous species. Further, since Darwinian evolution would predict survival of the fittest, with a constant upward trend in the evolution of species, extinction of any species thought to be millions of years old would be inevitable. As a new, more fit species evolved onto the scene, it would survive, pushing out its previous, less fit form. On the other hand, if biblical creation and the flood are true, completely different predictions would be made concerning the fossil record. Since God initially created representatives of all kinds rather than their evolving from previous forms, since fossil forming phenomena are rare, and since the earth is young, the bulk of the fossil record would be not a record of the past life of evolution on a billions of years old earth, but a record of death as the year-long flood progressed. Few fossils would be found below the flood layers, with many of those having likely been destroyed when the flood began. The flood layers, on the other hand, would be the equivalent of a worldwide graveyard, a record of the destruction of all living things, which were on the face of the ground. Genesis 7:23 says that all living things. Creationists would predict that when the flood began, mass destruction of life occurred worldwide, as all things were gone. And therefore, the fossil record would begin with an explosion of fossil forms that were fully formed and functional, with no evidence of having evolved from the previous forms. The bulk of these fossils would be in sedimentary rock, since the flood was an aqueous event. Both simple and complex creatures would be mixed throughout the fossil record, while larger, faster, or smarter creatures would sometimes be found higher in the record, since they could more easily escape fossil forming phenomena and survive longer. If much of the flood waters came from the oceans, as the text and scientific evidence seem to imply, the fossils at the base of the fossil record would be of creatures found on the ocean floor, followed by marine creatures. As the flood waters continue to rise and the cataclysm hit the coast, shallow water organisms and coastline creatures would be killed and buried, followed by creatures further and further inland. Marine fossils would be interspersed throughout the fossil record, since the ocean waters moving onto the land would have carried swimming creatures with them. After the flood ended, since fossil forming phenomena are rare, those creatures that were unable to rebound after the flood, or which were hunted, etc., would gradually go extinct, often with no record or having even survived the flood, while the fossils of the year-long flood would show no evidence of change throughout the year. The layers after the flood would be predicted to show evidence that the diversifying of creatures after they left the ark to repopulate the earth. This model's predictions best fit the physical evidence gleaned from paleontology. Paleontologists have long acknowledged three general characteristics of the fossil record in its totality. Number one, abrupt appearance. The equilibrium problem of Mr. Guth. Number two, stasis. And three, extinction. Each of these characteristics fit the creation flood paradigm well, but create an uncomfortable paradox for the Darwinian gradual. The abrupt appearance. The general characteristic refers to the fact that when fossils first appear in the fossil record, they appear fully formed without any evolutionary history. The Cambrian explosion, for example, refers to the many fully formed creatures that abruptly appear in the base of the fossil record with no ancestors. Reporting on research at the University of Texas at Austin, the UT News reported this rapid diversification, known as the Cambrian explosion, puzzled Charles Darwin and remains one of the biggest questions in animal evolution to this day. Very few fossils exist of organisms that could be the Precambrian ancestors of bilateral animals, and even those of are highly controversial. Rosario et al., writing in the American Science, acknowledged, as Darwin noted in the Origin of Species, the abrupt emergence of arthropods in the fossil record during the Cambrian presents a problem for evolutionary biology. There are no obvious simpler or intermediate forms, either living or in the fossil record, that show convincingly how modern arthropods evolved from worm-like ancestors. Consequently, there has been a wealth of speculation and contention. The late well-known evolutionary paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould admitted the Cambrian explosion, punctuated equilibrium, was the most remarkable and puzzling event in the history of life. Famous evolutionary biologist Oxford University's Richard Dawkins described the Cambrian explosion this way. Cambrian strata of rocks vintage about 600 million years ago. Secular geologists are now dating the beginning of the Cambrian at about 540 million years, as the oldest, in which we find most of the major invertebrate groups, and we find many of them already in the advanced state of evolution. The very first time they appear, it is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Well, I will stop sharing that, and I will go on to the next one. So, debunked. Needs sound effects. Number two is that the mutations are prevented from accumulating in a population. Researchers have found that DNA mutations are not random. This changes our understanding of evolution and could one day help researchers breed better crops or even help humans fight cancer. Let's go to this. Science Daily. Study challenges evolutionary theory that DNA mutations are random. You need to read this article. It was done by the University of California, Berkeley or Davis, which is another extension of the University of California system, which is so liberal that they had, back in the 1960s, they had separate toilets made for black children that were going to the preschool while their parents were going to classes, that were made of glass, so that the poor African American children didn't think that they were melting when they took a crap. That's what the University of California system came up with. It's only unreasonable. But researchers have found that DNA mutations are not random. This changes the understanding of evolution, and it could one day help researchers breed better crops, and even that. It's just phenomenal. Right? It's just phenomenal. So now we go to this one. This is by International Creation Research, very reputable. They have a bunch of PhDs. They're real doctors of science. They have a very nice website. So random mutations debunked by secular scientists. They finally had to do it like they did with Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and all these other guys. A fundamental axiom of evolutionary theory is the alleged random appearance of mutations in the DNA of an organism. This supposedly creates novel genetic variation for the mystical agent called natural selection to act upon. That essential premise has now been utterly debunked in a new secular research paper published by the journal Nature. Scientists had previously discovered that genetic variation in the genome was not random and tended to be much lower around parts of the genome involved in the regulation and stability. But a comprehensive study on the entire genome to evaluate mutation and variation had not been done until now. In this new study, the researchers used a small weedy plant called Arabidopsis, which has a very small and compact genome that makes it much easier to study.